Hello everybody. So my name is John McCann. I guess I'm best known for a book that came out in 2005. It was called Passing Through the 82nd Airborne Division in Northern Ireland, 1943-1944. The book was later adapted into a BBC Northern Ireland documentary called Over Here. That came out in 2006. What I think Passing Through does is it allows the American soldiers, who there were lots of back in 2005, I spoke to hundreds of them at the time, but it gives them a chance, gives us a chance to hear their perspective and the experiences and social interactions they shared with the people of Northern Ireland. So today I'm going to use their memories and words in an attempt to give you just a small glimpse of what their time was like over here. Their legacy, as we all know, is one of suffering and sacrifice to secure the freedom that we all share here today. But we must also remember that the people of Northern Ireland bestowed a legacy upon the American soldiers, one of loving, caring and understanding people in a country of outstanding beauty and tranquility. So just before I move to the next slide, All-American, AA stands for All-American. The reason they were called the All-Americans is in the First World War, they were the 82nd Infantry Division, but someone realized that every state in the Union there was someone in the ranks in every state of the Union. So they gave them the nickname the All-Americans, and that has stuck to this day and probably will never change. So the 82nd Airborne Division came in the second phase of American troops to come here. The first phase, which is well known, was Operation Magnet. But we're going to move on beyond that, and we're going to go to the second phase when 15 Corps came. Now 15 Corps, approximately 60,000 troops, contain the 2nd Infantry Division, the 5th Infantry Division, the 8th Infantry Division, and of course the 82nd Airborne Division. The 82nd Airborne Division were under the command of Major General Matthew Ridgway. And let me just move on here. And before the division arrived, I'll just let you know, 5 Corps were here in Northern Ireland for the advanced training and preparations for the D-Day landings. It was called Operation Bolero, which was the build-up of ground troops in Northern Ireland. So before the division arrived in Northern Ireland, Brigadier General James Gavin, who was the Assistant Divisional Commander to Ridgway, came to inspect their billets in Northern Ireland. Gavin's mother and father were Irish immigrants who put him into an orphanage at the age of 2. There he was adopted by Martin and Mary Gavin, who themselves both had Irish ancestry. He loved his Irish roots and always looked forward to seeing the country of his parents' birth. Now, just before we talk about him, I'm going to just roughly go through the 82nd Airborne Division and what they were created to do. So it was an elite airborne army infantry division which specialised in parachute assault training behind enemy lines. It differed from regular Army infantry divisions in that each trooper received $50 per month extra hazardous pay duty. They were amongst the US Army's most rigorously trained elite troops assigned to parachute into dangerous combat situations, recover safely from the jump, locate and join their units, and then move to their objectives and successfully engage the enemy. And of course, it had an extremely high operational mortality rate, up to 70%. The one thing not mentioned there is that all the soldiers in the 82nd in the parachute infantry regiments were all volunteers. There was a glider infantry regiment, they were draftees, but parachute troops were all volunteers. Now the division arrived in Northern Ireland a lot of people seem to think when we talk about American paratroops, we think 101st Airborne and how amazing the 101st Airborne were. The 101st Airborne Division at this time had never been in combat. They were still in America training. But the 82nd Airborne Division, they had already been through Operation Torch, where they trained in North Africa, Operation Husky, that was the invasion of Sicily, and Operation Avalanche, which was the drop onto the Salerno beachhead as part of the Allied invasion of Italy. So when the 82nd arrived here, they had came from combat for quite a long time, and they were fairly experienced and battle hardened. So let's go back to Brigadier General Gavin, and when he arrived in Ireland, he came. Now they arrived in December, so when he arrived, he went around the camps, and this is what he thought. So he maybe wasn't that keen on the land of his parents. But of course it was December. It was the beginning of December. You know, it was bright at 9, dark at 3, raining all the time. How could you possibly like it? Okay. So on departure from Naples, almost no one in the division knew the final destination of the convoy. As it turned out for the troopers of the 505th Parachute Infantry Regiment, they were on board the United States attack transport ship Frederick Function, and they arrived in Belfast. And that is a picture of the arrival of the ship in Belfast. As you can see, like all troop ships at the time, it was laden with troops, thousands of troops, who had just come across through the Straits of Gibraltar, risking the attack of U-boats, but managed to get here in one piece. Just like you see, stern of the ship, again, lots of troops. So Captain Robert Piper had arrived in Northern Ireland after seeing combat in Sicily and Salerno. And when he got here, he realised for the first time that Belfast would be the stepping off point. He breathed a heavy sigh of relief. No longer did home seem so far away. Because of the contrast to the hot, dirty, non-English speaking areas we had been in, I think we all thought it was heaven. How often do you hear Northern Ireland called heaven? Not often. After being trucked to the 82nd headquarters in Castledawson, which happens to be my hometown, Sergeant Len Levinson was optimistic about his time in the province. I was delighted at the prospect of many possible clashes of accent and the humorous encounters that might lie ahead. Sergeant Ray Burchell was with C Company 325th Glider Infantry Regiment, and he was stationed in Ballymena. Soon he realised there may be opportunities ahead to have a good time. When we realised where we were, feelings of happiness abound, and everyone's focus was on having as much fun as possible. Because you have to remember, they had just came from combat, so you know, this for them was paradise. So after debarkation, the division split up into its different elements before being transported by train or truck to their allocated camps throughout the Ulster countryside. The 505th Parachute Infantry Regiment and the 320th Glider Field Artillery Battalion went to Cookstown. The 507th Parachute Infantry Regiment went to Portrush. The 508th Parachute Infantry Regiment went to Port Stewart. The 325th Glider Infantry Regiment, they mainly were in Port Glenone. Some went to Ballymena, a few to Ahadui, and a few to Resharkin. Then the 307th Airborne Medical Company, Divisional Headquarters, 782nd Airborne Ordnance Company, the 407th Quartermaster Company, the 82nd Airborne Signal Company, the 80th Anti-Aircraft Artillery Battalion and Divisional Band were all in Castledawson, in what is now the Meola Park Estate. The 319th Glider Field Artillery Battalion and the 456th Parachute Field Artillery Battalion were in Balahi and Cookstown. And finally, the 307th Airborne Engineering Battalion, which was a combat battalion, they were in Kilrea. On seeing the arrival of GIs near his hometown of Castledawson, renowned poet Seamus Heaney described them in his poem Testimony Anahorish 1944 as unknown, unnamed, hosting for Normandy. Not that we knew then where they were headed, standing there like youngsters as they tossed us gum and tubes of coloured sweets. Of course, one of the joys of writing Passing Through was putting names to those unnamed American soldiers as described by Heaney. Now, in participation for the arrival of the division, and especially its parachute troops, American Army engineers came in advance to construct parachute drying sheds for any potential airborne training drops that might take place. One such facility was in Ballyscullion near Balahi, where the 202nd Combat Engineer Battalion was tasked with constructing the parachute drying sheds. So, and of course, with hard work comes large appetites, and with large appetites comes long chow lines, as you can see. The drying sheds were completed in early 1944, and but no training drops ever took place, resulting in them being demolished or just used for storage. The engineers, however, as you can see, were proud of the work that they had done. And I got to know a couple of these gentlemen, and just lovely, lovely men. So nearby Castledawson, all units associated with divisional headquarters settled into their new accommodation on the Myola Park estate. One such unit was the 307th Airborne Medical Company. And you can see here the sentry at the guard post into the camp. Now, if you went there now, the tree's still there, but if you went down that road, it brings you to the Myola Park Football Club. The football field is there now. So that's where the football field is on Bridge Street, Castledawson, just about 200 yards from my home. This sentry guardhouse was one of 4 entrances to the camp. Another one, which was inside the entrance, attracted the attention of local children. And that photograph, it shows Sergeant Howard Temple of 307th Airborne Medical Company, and he stands with 5 Castledawson children in front of the sentry post at the entrance to the headquarters in Castledawson. And as it says in the bottom, the picture approximately reflects the ratio of US soldiers to the Northern Ireland populace. For every 5 Northern Ireland people, there was 1 American soldier. Now, Christmas Day, 1943, and this was kitchen police duty, KP duty. We know it's Christmas Day because although it's hard to see, well, you can just see them there, there's pine branches above one of the cookhouses, and I was reassured by the person that sent me the photographs that that was Christmas Day. So and here you can see some of the medics at the camp, which just runs along the Myola River, beside their Nissen huts, with the company mascot dog, which was called Blackie. I never found out who actually owned the dog in Castledawson because they didn't bring it with them for sure. Right. Okay, now Corporal Dale Gillespie described what it was like to sleep in a Nissen hut during the winter in Northern Ireland. Now, instead of the Italian mountains, I found myself in a hard bunk trying to sleep in long johns with my heavy overcoat on top of my blanket. It was very cold. Of course, the American version of the Nissen hut was the Quonset hut. So Americans would usually call them Quonset huts. But in Northern Ireland, most of the huts were built by the British before the Americans came. So they were mainly Nissen huts. So this slide shows the castle in Castle Dawson at the Meola Park estate, and it was originally home to James Dawson Chichester Clark, who would later become the 5th Prime Minister of Northern Ireland. The castle itself became the billet of Major General Matthew Ridgway, who was the commander of the 82nd, and Brigadier General Maxwell Taylor. Now, most people, you hear Maxwell Taylor, they think 101st Airborne Division, and that's true. Maxwell Taylor went on to command the 101st Airborne Division, but when he was in Northern Ireland, he was the artillery commander of the 82nd. It was only after going into Normandy that he was transferred to command the 101st. So the house has quite a bit of fame, and it had those two very famous generals. Also, Gavin would have been there too, but only for a short time. Chichester Clark himself, he was away serving with the Irish Guards, part of the 24th Guards Brigade, attached to the 1st Infantry Division during the Italian campaign. However, alongside him, there was the 504th Parachute Infantry Regiment, which had been part of the 82nd, but were detached from them to participate in Operation Shingle. That was the Allied landings at Anzio. And the 504 would not join the division again until March 1944 in England. So it's a strange coincidence that the owner of the house was at Anzio and the generals were there in his house, and some of the division was also at Anzio, so it's a strange thing. Okay, so on VE Day 2006, Len Levinson, who I mentioned earlier, he returned with us to Meola Park to unveil a monument there that we dedicated to the division's stay. And it's still there, and the golf course is still there, but sadly Len, who was from Manhattan in New York City, is deceased a number of years. But again, an amazing man, lovely man. And there you just see elements of the division were billeted in and around what is now the back nine of Meola Park Golf Club. But the actual monument is at the clubhouse at the putting green. Now, after debarkation from the Frederick Funkston, the 505th Parachute Infantry Regiment was transferred to Cookstown, where Nissen huts became their homes for the next 2 months. 1st Battalion was billeted at Killymoon Castle, 2nd Battalion at Desert Crate Farm, and 3rd Battalion at Drum Manor Park. Serving with Regimental Headquarters Company on the south side of Cookstown was the famous war artist Lindsay Prescott. His drawings depict a bleak, cold winter's day. Guard duty within the camp. If you notice there, the patch, the AA patch, has been removed because at the start they wanted to keep it a secret to spies or whatever where the division was. So, but according to the local people, within a couple of days they'd sewn their patches back on again. So it didn't. It wasn't that important to them as such. As I mentioned earlier, 1st Battalion of the 505th Parachute Infantry Regiment were billeted at Killymoon Castle and Estate. And there's the castle there, and you can see the American flag flying. It was occupied by regimental headquarters. The family had, it was requisitioned obviously, and the family had a little tiny piece of the house. The back kitchen basically is all they had. And then the American officers moved in and took over the house. You can also see, if you look closely, you can see a sentry there on the, just here, and you can see the American Jeep in here. Now, was it last week we had a big event there to commemorate the 1st Battalion being there, and it was a lovely day, and the castle has got an amazing history with regard to the war and the 82nd Airborne. Now, that's about 2 miles south of Killymoon Castle was Dromana Park, which is now Dromana Forest Park, of course. Sergeant Chris Christensen of 3rd Battalion, 505 Parachute Infantry Regiment was billeted there and described the Nissen huts as definitely no Waldorf Astoria. They were as cold as tombs, but a welcome change from the foxholes we used in the Mediterranean. Again, you see the picture there by Lindsay Prescott, and you can see some of the huts that were in the camp. And as for the stove, it was a thing of real beauty. Internal insulation had reduced the diameter of the fire chamber to a mere 6 inches. In other words, you could sit on it and not feel any heat. From the roof of Killymoon Castle, Lieutenant Stanley Weinberg of B Company 505th Parachute Infantry Regiment looked out from its turrets to the estate. And what you can see in the foreground, we have, well, the Ballinderry River is to the right-hand side, and troopers can be seen playing baseball. And in the background, they're playing American football. So baseball in the foreground, American football in the background. And then there was a lot of chicken coops, etc. And that's where they spent most of their time, just in front of the castle. And it's still there to this day. The trees are still there, just a bit bigger. So if you ever go there and look, the image is almost the same, just things are bigger. Now the 505th Parachute Infantry Regiment trained at the firing range in the townland of Ballymoltray, which was mentioned earlier, on Loch Ness northwestern shoreline between Ballyronan and Ballinderry. Seen here, front middle, is Lieutenant Stanley Weinberg and members of B Company 505th Parachute Infantry Regiment, taking a break from weapons practice at the range in February 1944. Second Lieutenant James Coyle of E Company also trained at the range at Ballymoltray. He remembers digging foxholes which we occupied while tanks were driven over us to prove it was safe. This made a change from our normal routine, but to the best of my knowledge, no man in E Company was ever run over by a tank in combat. So that was a bit pointless training. Okay. Now, different caliber mortar practice took place at a location the paratroopers called Strawberry Hill. The exact location is unknown, but it's most likely to have been on the slopes of Slieve Gallion near Moneymore. I Company, 3rd Battalion of the 505th Parachute Infantry Regiment, were lucky enough to be stationed in hotels in Cookstown. The reason for the company's good fortune was that no cases of VD had been reported by any of the troopers coming from Sicily or Italy. Hitch Company 3rd Battalion, however, were billeted at Dromana Forest Park near Cookstown in County Tyrone. In this photograph, you can see 6 troopers posing in full jump gear at the camp. And here, troopers demonstrate how to exit C-47 troop carrier. But of course, they never got to do that when they were in Northern Ireland. And here you see a trooper from Hitch Company posing in full combat gear, holding his Thompson submachine gun. Sergeant Alan Barger of D Company, 505th, was billeted at Desert Crate Farm and said of his time in Northern Ireland, "We had a lot of good times in North Ireland, and sweet memories they are, for we were pretty far from any evidence of war as we had seen it." Private George Jacobus, again of E Company, also was at Desert Gate Farm, and he remembers his time around Cookstown, maybe less poetically. "We marched, cursed and danced our ways in and out of the dance halls, pubs and local places during our stay. We had one hell of a good time." Whereas Private Robert Murphy of A Company, billeted at Killymoon Castle, was more succinct with his statement. It was like being at home with our families. Just now that we see Bob Murphy there, a lot of people don't know that Bob survived the war, went on to become a very famous Boston lawyer, and then in 1963 he was on JFK's presidential campaign for his election, so Bob became quite famous. He's also portrayed in the movie The Longest Day as the paratrooper that falls into the greenhouse. So if you ever see someone get into a greenhouse, that was Bob Murphy. He's only 18 at the time, he's so young. Yeah. On the anniversary of VE Day 2006, I invited Barbara Gavin, who was the daughter of James Gavin, to come over and unveil the monument to the 505 at Killymoon Castle. She said it was a very proud day for her to do so in memory of her father and the troopers he commanded. At the unveiling, on the right-hand side, were 3 82nd Airborne veterans. Len Levinson, as you can see, and beside him to the right was Clinton Riddle, who was with the 325th Glider Infantry Regiment in Port Glenone, and Bob Davis in the cream, second from the end there. Bob was in Portrush during their time in Ireland. So let's move on now to the north coast. And the 507, who Bob was a member of, they were the only regiment to be billeted in a town, actually in the town. In their case, the hotels, guest houses and B&Bs in Portrush. So if you're ever in Portrush, nearly every one of those houses, especially on Lansdowne Crescent, was all occupied by the 507th. Along with their sister regiment, the 508th, the 507 had joined the division directly from the United States after the 504 was left at Anzio. Of course, Portrush was abuzz with GIs, as can be seen with these officers in their dress uniform. And other officers spent time in the company of local residents. In this case, this is a house opposite the entrance to Royal Portrush Golf Club. And again, many troopers like Sergeant Bill Bowl of Headquarters and Headquarters Company befriended local families and spent all their free time with them. The 507 had arrived in Portrush only 1 week before Christmas 1943. Being away from home was difficult, but Sergeant Ed Isbell of E Company recalled, "What was a sad Christmas for most of us young boys will always be remembered by how nice the people were to us. They treated us as one of their own. We were only kids away from home during Christmas time, and they shared their love and understanding with us." And when the regiment had to leave for England in March 1944, it is always hard saying goodbye to loved ones or friends, especially those that had gone out of their way to help lonely boys feel more at home during the Christmas season of 1943. The good people of Northern Ireland treated us Yanks as their own. I don't think we will ever forget that, and he never did. Private Herd Hubner of C Company, he felt the same. It will always be in our minds how nice the people treated us and the good times we had while there. They will never be forgotten, the people of Northern Ireland. Corporal Bob Davis, who we saw earlier at the unveiling, he was with headquarters in Headquarters Company 507 Parachute Infantry Regiment. And here he unveils the monument that we placed at Royal Portrush Golf Club beside the practice green at Royal Portrush. Good news about it is because, and it was there for the British Open 2 or 3 years ago, and a lot of the Americans got to see it and comment on it, so much so that they're now moving it to a more prominent location, possibly the first tee box at Royal Portrush Golf Club. So if you're watching the Open next year, you'll probably see the monument there. So again, yes, that's me without hair and without a beard, big ears. But that was in 2005. As I mentioned earlier, the 505 were billeted in Nissen huts at Camp Cremore outside Port Stewart. And there's the insignia for the 508, which is a red devil in a parachute. And here's the camp notice board. And it gave information on the local dances, movies, baseball, the barbershop times, religious services, and event cancellations. There's a lot to see there, so I'll give you, see if you, it's difficult to read, but most things are there. Now, Camp Cremore was outside of Port Stewart, and obviously to get into camp, because we had no private vehicles, it was either borrow a bicycle, hitchhike, one of our own vehicles, or walk. And in the end, that's what most of us did, walk to wherever it was we wanted to go. And of course, if you're taking a trip to Bushmills Distillery, which many of them did, no one would ever come home without some of the local whiskey. And of course, everyone wanted to visit Dunluce Castle. And there's many pictures of the soldiers at Dunluce Castle. And they loved it there because many of them hadn't seen a castle in their lives. They were coming from parts of America. There was, the history is quite short, and castles were something very strange to them. In Northern Ireland, interactions between the GIs and local people was encouraged. And of course, this allowed strong bonds to quickly develop. The people here are exceptionally nice to us and try to entertain us as best they know how. Every week I live here, the better I like it. Oh, what a life I'm leading. And that was Captain Bill Nation from Regimental Headquarters. And he was charmed by the kindness of the Irish people. And First Sergeant Ralph Thomas of E Company also had the same feelings. The wonderful, friendly people opened their hearts to us and shared all they had. He also said, I loved the green fields of North Ireland, the ancient churches, the graveyards, and the quaint thatched roof farm homes. I loved the sheep and cows in the meadows, the one-horse carts and the small furry little donkeys, but most of all, I loved the wonderful, wonderful people. So I think you're getting a sense of the feelings that developed towards the people here. It was very strong, lifelong and very strong, and very important. And you were talking about legacy, that, as I said at the start, this is the legacy that the people of Northern Ireland left with the American soldiers, left with the 82nd Airborne. Very, very important to remember that. Sergeant Don Jakeway Memories of Northern Ireland will always remain pleasant ones for me. The warm and kind people we came to know made our brief stay an unforgettable one. Now the 508 were here for 3 months, which is a long time anywhere during wartime. Usually you move so fast from location to location. So they had time to get to know the people, and they had time to build relationships, and it meant the world to them. So finally, I'm going to talk about another regiment who must not be forgotten, and that's the 325th Glider Infantry Regiment. These were the ones who were drafted. Now, just let you. Now the 320. Oh, sorry. That's the that is the memorial dedicated to the 508th in Camp Cremore in Port Stewart. Currently, they're rebuilding. I think they're building a hotel there at present, and the council have promised me they're looking after the monument, but I haven't heard anything from them in a long time, so I'm a little bit nervous. And it's all closed off now. It's private property, so I can't kind of get in to check on it. But fingers crossed. Now, as I was saying, we're talking about the 325th Glider Infantry Regiment. You think the paratroopers had it bad? The glider troops, it was far worse. They risked their lives in a glider. Every glider crash landed. And most of the men probably were killed in the landing before they even got a chance. At least paratroopers had a chance to control their landing. The glider troops had no choice but to risk their lives just landing in the glider before they actually got out and went into combat. And most of the, as I said earlier, most of the regiments, I'll just let you see their insignia. And let's go, that's if they manage to get out of the glider, of course. Most of the regiment, as I mentioned earlier, were billeted in Port Glenone, which is now Port Glenone Forest Park, if you're ever there. And you'll still see some of the concrete bases if you take a walk around. Others were in Ballymena and a few in other places. On his first evening in camp in what is now Port Glenone Forest Park, Private Clinton Riddle of B Company wrote this poem. Tonight as I sit upon my bunk in a foreign land, I see my buddies gathered there, linked together within one band. We have many lonely hours we have to spend some way. Oft times we laugh and joke and speak of the coming day, when we will be at home around the family's band. It's then we shall speak of our time in a foreign land. Fortunately for me, I got to meet Clinton. You saw him in the earlier photographs, and we got to bring him back to Port Glenone Forest Park. And when he was there, he unveiled the monument there to the 325th Glider Infantry Regiment, of which he was a part. And he did it very proudly, and it was a wonderful day. So there are 5 monuments to the 82nd. We've placed 5 monuments. One at Killymoon Castle, one at Royal Portrush, one at Cremore and Port Stewart, one at Mayola Park in Castle Dawson, and the final one is at, someone remind me, I can't remember. Yes?
War Memorial in Portrush.
There's one there. Yes, there's one there as well, that's right. And the other place is in, obviously, Port Glenone Forest Park. So those places all have monuments to the regiments who were there. So Clinton Riddle is seen here unveiling the monument dedicated to the regiment. Dedicated to the men of the 325th Glider Infantry Regiment, 82nd Airborne Division. From the 9th of December to the 13th of February 44, and they took part in combat in Sicily, Italy, Normandy, Holland, Belgium and Germany. To survive all those campaigns, you know, any man that survived did very well. One trooper once described the 82nd's time in Northern Ireland as an oasis between battlefields. Feelings of profound gratitude to a country and its people. Thoughts that would remain with the All-Americans the remainder of their lives. For many troopers, there was also feelings of belonging, as their family roots were steeped in native Irish or Ulster Scots ancestry. However, all good things must come to an end, and on the 13th of February 1944, the 82nd Airborne Division shipped out of Northern Ireland for England and advanced preparations for D-Day. Then early in the morning of June 6th, 1944, which we've just celebrated there, the division descended behind German lines into Normandy and began the Allied invasion of Europe. And we all celebrate D-Day, and it was the 80th anniversary. We must remember that D-Day wasn't the only day. The 82nd remained in combat for 33 days, and the Normandy campaign was a terrible campaign because you had the bocage, which was all the high hedges, and they had to fight through that. And a lot of them said that Northern Ireland gave them good preparation because of the hedges in Northern Ireland. When they got to Normandy and the bocage region, they were used to these high hedges. So we can say that as well. So let's talk about what they went through. So here we have a picture of the 505 in St. Mary Glees on D-Day. What they did that day was successfully secure bridges and exit routes for the seaborne troops moving inland from Utah Beach. The 82nd landed about 2:30 in the morning. They parachuted in about 2:30 in the morning. It was 6:30 before the beach landings. So they had 4 hours to secure towns, bridges, and make it safer for the troops to come in off the beaches. And they were behind enemy lines, so it was a very dangerous thing that they were doing. And they were behind Utah Beach. They were protecting the soldiers coming off Utah Beach. The most notable thing for the 505, who were in Cookstown, especially the 1st Battalion who were in, the 2nd Battalion who were at Desert Crate Farm, they were the battalion that liberated the first town in Nazi-occupied Europe, the town of St. Mary Glees, St. Mary's Church. So as I mentioned earlier, 33 days later, the division was relieved, having seen severe combat and casualties with over 5,000 troopers killed, wounded or missing in action. In September, the division took part in Operation Market Garden, and in December fought in the Battle of the Bulge, and afterwards it fought its way through Germany, ending the war on occupation duty in Berlin. And there you can see the parade in Berlin at the Brandenburg Gate. At war's end, it is estimated that 50% of all the troopers who came to Northern Ireland, that's 50%, became casualties of war, with 35% being killed in action. Then on January the 2nd, 1946, the 82nd Airborne Division was selected as America's Guard of Honor, and in many of the same jump boots that trod the roads of Ulster 3 years earlier, they led the victory parade up 5th Avenue, New York, in honour of all the units that served during World War II. Today, the division is the United States Army's most strategically mobile division and considered the best trained light infantry division in the world. And to this day, they remain America's Guard of Honor. The end. Now, I only had time to cover a very small amount. There's so many other things I could cover, but it would be dark before you got home, and that wouldn't be fair. So look, I want to thank you all for coming. Thank you for listening, and thank you for your interest in something that many years ago I thought no one really cared about, until I spoke to the veterans, and then I realized they cared, and then I realized the people of Northern Ireland cared. And this is why I do this now. I do this to remember them, and I do this to let people know just how wonderful a country we come from and what we did during the war. Not we, obviously. If there's anyone here who lived during the war, good for you. But our parents and our grandparents did amazing things, and I think we should all be very proud. Thank you very much.